Welcome to Communication Between Cultures, Chapter 5, Worldview, Cultural Explanations of Life and Death. A person's worldview is the cultural orientation which helps guide that person in understanding or interpreting the reality of the world around them. It helps them to see themselves more clearly, to identify themselves more clearly, and to relate to the world around them, to the events of that are happening around them. It's important as an intercultural communicator to be able to have a knowledge, at least a basic knowledge of other common worldviews, so that you can better understand another person's behaviors and responses to different situations. There are many types or forms of worldview. Worldviews are originated in our culture and are composed of a variety of different elements. But the most significant forms of worldview, and what we're going to be talking about here in Chapter 5, are usually going to be able to be classified as either religious or non-religious. First, religious forms of worldview. Most all societies have some set of spiritual beliefs or practices that they call religion. And most of these religions have a very long history within that culture. And many of these religions are directly related to the values and the beliefs and the behaviors of that culture. We also have non-religious types of worldview, and these are generally referred to as secularism. A few of them you see here: atheism, agnosticism, deism, or secular humanism are examples of secularist worldviews. While all of these different types of secular worldviews vary from one another, they generally share some of the same core beliefs. First of all, they do not believe in a God. They don't believe that God exists, and that human social order, however, can exist even without organized religion. They also believe in evolution as a fact, and put a great deal of emphasis on science and scientific method, as these are the ways that they understand the universe. These are central to understanding the way the world works around us. They also believe that death is final. They don't believe in an afterlife or a heaven or a hell. Therefore, because of this reason, they feel that a person should strive to engage in humanitarian behavior and be the best person they can possibly be during their lifetimes. Another type of form of worldview is spirituality. The concept of spirituality centralizes around the belief that each person can use his or her own individual resources to discover ultimate truth or inner peace, or the purpose of life, or whatever it is that they're searching for. This involves looking into or engaging in a personal search for truth, rather than just believing some pre-prescribed answers or pre-prescribed doctrine from an outside source like an organized religion. So you may take an organized religion and use it as a guide, but come up with your own version of what you think is the truth. And that is spirituality. This can be expressed and achieved in a variety of different ways. We see it expressed in art. We often see it, people attempt to achieve spirituality through meditation, music, and yes, even prayer and traditional religious worship. Like I said, you can use organized religion as a basis for spirituality. In fact, because of its focus on the individual, spirituality is very common in individualistic cultures like that of the United States. We may not even realize that we're engaging in a type of practice that has a name beyond just regular, normal, what we would consider normal individualistic thinking. We tend to take information in an individualistic culture like our own and internalize it, think about it, reflect upon it, come up with some version of it that makes the most sense to us, to see what is right, what is true, and work on it. This is exactly what a spiritualist does when contemplating religion. They may take a particular religion, even say, I am Christian or I am Jewish, and ascribe to that particular religion, but they take the lessons of that religion, internalize it, meditate upon it, and expand upon it or personalize it. And that is considered spirituality. So why do we bother studying religion in respect to intercultural communication? As we said before, knowledge of other types of world views helps us to be able to understand the behaviors of other people better. But why does it have such an effect on people's behaviors? Religion is one of the deep structure institutions of culture that we talked about in the previous chapters. It deals with issues that matter most to people, such as life and death, creation of the universe, the origins of society, and how people should relate to one another. Religion cannot be separated from our daily lives. Even though sometimes we think about religion as something that we only go to or do on a Friday or a Saturday or a Sunday, really religion drives everything that we do, every little thing, from whether or not we help somebody when they're having a hard time, or whether or not we choose to tell the clerk when they make a mistake, or tell the bank when they make a mistake in our favor. These things are directly related, these choices are directly related to our religious teachings. And some religions actually are very involved on a very detailed day-to-day basis when it comes to ritual. Some are more than, or some religions have more daily rituals than others. Some religions have daily rituals that involve every little thing that a person does, from what they say when somebody sneezes to what they say or do when somebody dies. So religion is extremely important in understanding the behaviors of any individual. Another good reason to study religion is because globalization has resulted in former geographical and cultural boundaries to become blurred and even non-existent. What does that mean? It means that religion is not something, or different religions are not something that just happen, over there in that other country or in that other part of town. We now live in a society that is very blended when it comes to its religious ideas. So the person sitting next to us may very well be somebody who ascribes to a very different religious ideology than we do. And the people that we're going to be working with, will often come from many different religious backgrounds. So it is important to understand, at least basically, the other religious, or the other forms of, or the other religious worldviews that we will be coming in contact with. Another reason is because of the increased violence and the publicity of that violence in the name of religion. This is a phenomenon that has occurred throughout history, and it's not anything new, but we have seen a lot of it very recently when we talk about fundamentalist Islamic groups particularly. They will follow particular agendas, and then they use the name of religion in order to explain their agendas. But just like most of the groups in history who have used religion as flag, their real purposes tend to be more political, social, cultural, and really have very little to do with religion, at least realistically have very little to do with religion. But a person who doesn't have any knowledge of religion would not be able to call that out, would not be able to understand that, not be able to see past the religious rhetoric in order to understand what the true cause of their disgruntlement, the true reasons behind their behaviors are. Unless we can look past the religious rhetoric and see what the actual problems are that are causing the behaviors that are difficult, or the behaviors that we need to address, we will not be able to properly address them as a global society, and will not be able to eradicate problems. Now let's look at some of the basic commonalities of religion. Most all religions seek to provide answers to the universal questions for which science has no definite answer. Cosmic questions like, what is the purpose of life? Where did we come from? Who created the earth? Who created the universe? How was the earth created? How was the universe created? And also things that are less cosmic and more just trying to understand relationships between human beings, something for which science cannot really give answers to. How do we define our relationships? How should we interact with one another? How should we interact with nature? These are things which science cannot answer, but our religions tend to seek to answer. Also, most religions have sacred scriptures of some sort. All major religions are transmitted by some type of central writing. Now, sometimes those central writings are thought to be written or dictated by some kind of higher spiritual power or a deity, and then given to society either directly or indirectly through the means of certain enlightened individuals, or directly from the deity itself. Or sometimes these sacred scriptures are simply writings by human beings describing their own experiences, their own spiritual experiences, or their own religious experiences. But whichever form the sacred scriptures take, their purpose is to teach the fundamentals of any particular religion and preserve those fundamentals, preserve those teachings, and so that in a way that they can be transmitted then from one generation to the next. Most all religions also involve some form of ritual. Rituals are symbolic actions that help the adherents to kind of reaffirm their beliefs, to remember what is important to them, and to feel a special spiritual connection with their religion, not just their deities or their overall values and beliefs, but also it helps them to feel a connection with others who believe the same way that they do. Rituals also help people to reaffirm their identities, to develop their identities, and it also helps them feel as though their life has meaning and structure. Another very important commonality of religions is ethics. Most all religions involve the teaching of some kind of ethics. They all pretty much, one of the major purposes of religion is to discriminate between what is acceptable and what is unacceptable conduct, what is to be valued, what is to be avoided, and an effort to achieve not only the spiritual goals of the particular religion, but also a very practical social harmony, so that we can have some kind of catalyst for people behaving well toward each other, behaving well toward nature, toward the world, so that we can have a peaceful working society. Another commonality of religion is that it provides a safe haven for its adherents. Religion gives its adherents the concept of being a part of something larger than than their individual self. It gives them that sense that when things are going bad for them, they can have somewhere to go to, either literally somewhere, a physical place to go to, or a spiritual place that they can go to, or having people who believe the same way that they do, who are there to support them. In Chapter 5, we're going to be taking a look at 6 of the world's most common and most influential religions. And the purpose of this examination of these 6 religions is to evaluate the importance of religion to intercultural communication by concentrating on how religion affects behavior and perception. So we're going to be looking at some of the core values and beliefs of each particular religion, but we're going to then take a look at how those values and beliefs affect behavior and what is important to these people. Any claim to be knowledgeable about any one or a variety of the religions that we're going to be looking at would require a much more in-depth study than we're going to be doing here. You're not going to become a guru on Hinduism just because of this particular examination. It's not going to happen. I am not a religious scholar. I cannot make you a religious scholar. But what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at some of the basics and trying to get a little bit at least of an idea of how these religions, what is important to the people who follow these religions and how these religions work, so that you can then take that information and use it in your intercultural communication processes. And if you are to be in common contact with one of these religions, you should probably take a closer look examination at it and learn a little bit more than we're going to be learning here today. Okay, we're going to start with Christianity, since it is the most common religion here in the United States and the one which many of us are probably most familiar with. Some of the core assumptions of Christianity: first of all, it is a monotheistic religion. There is only one God, and Christians believe that God was the person or the being who created the heaven and the earth. Christians also believe that Jesus of Nazareth was God in human form and came to walk among humans and teach them the way of God. Interestingly, and I point this out as a matter of looking at how non-religious cultural events have affected religion. We often look at how religion affects culture, but we don't often get to see a glance of how non-religious events and non-religious ideologies affect religion and change religion. The idea of Jesus as a deity was not introduced into the religion until it was not introduced into the religion, not codified, I should say, into the religion until 325 AD by Constantine during the Council of Nicaea. Prior to that, Jesus was not seen as a deity at all, but seen as merely an enlightened human being who was chosen by and created by God. Some Christians still follow this concept. Rather than seeing Jesus as a deity, they see Jesus as a human being, or both. But the general belief, or the most common Christian ideology, is that Jesus is actually a deified form, or human form of God the deity. Jesus was also crucified, and his death signified the salvation of believers. Jesus was also said to have been resurrected by God. When Jesus was resurrected by God after his crucifixion, he evolved into a third form of deification called the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the third arm, or third leg, if you will, of the Holy Trinity: God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is said to be a manifestation of God which dwells within every individual and serves as guide and protector for each individual. Okay, the way that many of these slides are set up is that we will look at a particular belief or practice on the left side of the slide, and we will see on the corresponding right side the cultural impact that belief or practice of that particular religion has to cultural behaviors or communication behaviors. So let's first look at organized worship. In Christianity, the church serves as a place to worship. The physical church serves as a place to worship, but it also serves as a community with whom to worship. Christians are generally taught that when they are closer to each other, they are also closer to God. Or the closer they are to God, the closer they can be to one another. That same concept shows itself in American and other Western cultures by the fact that we are very socially oriented outside of our family groups. We belong to book clubs. We belong to committees, organizations, sports clubs, whatever. We tend to group together in many types of social organizations that are not our immediate family, that are not anything to do with our family. In fact, this is such an important part, such an important impact on our culture, that to not be involved in these types of activities is usually considered to be a negative thing. A person who does not have social involvement in organizations or clubs or committees or whatever outside of their family unit is generally not seen to be a productive member of society. Also, we see that Christianity makes it the responsibility of each individual to attain his or her own salvation. Christianity also gives us as Christians the ability to have a one-on-one personal relationship with God. This really fits into the whole concept of individualism and individuality that we see as, in the United States, that we see in other Western cultures. The majority of the American settlers who came here to came to what was going to be the United States were Christian. So this fundamental value of individuality, the individual right to have a relationship with God, the individual responsibility to attain your own salvation, it translates directly into the individualistic ideologies of the Americans, that it is each individual's responsibility to attain his or her own success, his or her own reputation, and that each individual has the right and the ability to do whatever they need and to be able to attain whatever position they would like to attain in society. Christianity is also a very doing religion. What we mean by that, from the beginning, Christianity has encouraged action in faith. It's not just enough to be a good person and be a Christian and believe the messages of Christianity, but you must also actively spread those messages, or at the very least, spread those messages through your outward behaviors, through your ability to say, I am Christian, and see what I am and see what I do. Western cultures, inspired by this same kind of concept of activity and action, also encourage activity and action in our non-religious activities as well. Any type of stagnation or laziness, it inspires a great deal of frustration for us, and it has very negative concepts and negative feelings about that. We feel as though a person must constantly be doing something in order to be a productive and decent and respectable member of society. In Christianity, they also believe that past mistakes can be forgiven and essentially erased if you repent for those sins. So essentially, the concept is that if you repent your sins, then what you do from that point forward is more important than what you have done in the past. Non-religious Western culture shadows the same kind of concept. We are very future-oriented, and we are often concerned more with what is going to happen in the future, or what may happen in the future, than what is actually happening now or what has happened in the past. Not that the past and the present are not important and not relevant to what we are doing, but what happens in the future has more importance. We give more importance to that future. Looking at gender roles within Christianity is a very interesting study. Interesting because it is a good example of how, again, non-religious cultural ideologies have affected the religious concepts or the religious doctrines, and how the religious doctrines have changed as our cultural ideologies have changed. Traditionally, women were considered to be sullied by the act of Eve in the Garden of Eden, and therefore were inferior to men. Interestingly, this again was not codified into the religion in any way until the First Council of Nicaea, that we spoke about before. And this was a reflection of the traditional cultures of the pagan people at the time that they were trying to incorporate into Christianity. They were trying to incorporate into the empire. So they incorporated this already existing concept of the inferiority of women into the religion in order to satisfy the already existing cultural traditions. Now, obviously, as we all know, this is not necessarily a very good reflection of our cultural beliefs today. Our cultural beliefs today are ones of equality, of ones of strength for women. And modern theologians and historians have attacked this concept of the inferiority of women in Christianity by doing studies and providing historical and biblical evidence that Jesus was actually very inclusive and accepting of women, encouraged women within society. And it's interesting, regardless of which is true, the traditional ideas or the modern ideas, what I find interesting is that the church itself, the Christians themselves, have been working now to try and change the religion, to come up with new evidence that now reflects modern cultural concepts, so that the religion is not in direct opposition to our modern cultural our modern cultural concepts. Another common belief or value of Christianity is courage. If we look at our biblical stories, many of them repeatedly talk about characters who have to face some kind of daunting challenge in their quest to serve God. They have to prove their faith and face very difficult situations and show a great deal of courage and bravery and faith in order to overcome the difficult situations that they're faced with. Each of these figures are then praised and rewarded for their behaviors, for their bravery. Similarly, in non-religious Western culture, we also see that bravery is a very powerful value in our American culture as well, and is very prevalent in a lot of our non-religious cultural stories and proverbs. We see bravery quite a lot. Now, as we said before, most religions, one of the commonalities of religion is a catalyst towards social peace or social structure, social harmony. For Christians, that is the concept of an afterlife. Christians believe that there is a life after death, and that believers who have lived a righteous life or have asked for forgiveness for their sins will then spend their eternity in this heaven, which is a type of paradise, while others who have not lived a righteous life or asked for repentance of their sins will burn in hell, which is an eternal damnation, is an eternal hell, I guess. So this fear of heaven and the promise, or the fear of hell and the promise of heaven, is a cultural motivator to get Christians to behave in a socially acceptable way, so that we can carry out our lives and have relatively decent and peaceful human relations. Interestingly, the World Christian Encyclopedia lists over 33,800 denominations worldwide. This is an incredible amount, especially when you think of the alternative. Judaism has essentially 3, and Islam has essentially 2. So that is a lot of denominations of any one particular type of religion. Why do you think there are so many denominations? Basically, the way an individual interprets his or her religion is affected by his or her other cultural influences, his or her outside cultural influences. Christianity is very popular in individualistic cultures. And in individualistic cultures, we encourage the spiritualist mindset. We encourage the ideology that someone is able to look at their Christian religion, their Christian teachings, and think about them, meditate upon them, and come up with their own version of them, and then tell others about their own version of them. In an individualistic culture, we do not generally put down the behaviors of someone who wants to have their own ideas and go their own ways. So a person is open and able to start a new denomination or a new branch of Christianity without much fear of retribution. So with that cultural setting, people then are able to do this on a more regular basis, and therefore we have so many different denominations. Christianity, of course, is not just popular in individualistic cultures. It is very popular in some very collective cultures as well, such as the Latin American cultures and the Eastern European cultures. But you will see in these cultures, we do not see as much diversity in denominations in these particular areas. And most of these areas, again, Latin America and Europe, some of the culture, like Italy, we see the Roman Catholic Church, almost 100% of the Christians in these areas are Roman Catholic. Or if we go into Eastern Europe, we see Eastern Orthodox, or the Russian Orthodox, or the Greek Orthodox churches, but there aren't very many variations of these particular churches in these areas. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Judaism. Let's look at some of the core assumptions of Judaism. Judaism is a monotheistic religion. They believe in one universal and eternal God who created the universe. Jews also believe in the inherent goodness of humankind, meaning that each person is inherently good, but that each human also possesses free will, which, as a result of free will, can actually make somebody behave in a non-good manner. Sin is committed by breaking the God-given commandments. Now, these commandments are those that are found in the Torah, which are the same thing as the first 5 books of the Christian Bible. So you see that there is a link there between Judaism and Christianity. And people must obey these commandments in order not to commit sin and therefore behave in a socially acceptable manner. The Jewish people believe that they as a society share a special covenant with God. And this covenant makes them unique. Now, many non-Jewish people misunderstand the concept of the special covenant, thinking that Jewish people use this concept of a special covenant to say that they are socially superior to other religious ideologies or other societies. But instead of being a concept of social superiority, the special covenant is actually considered to be an extra burden on the Jewish people, an extra set of responsibilities to the overall community, not just the Jewish community, but to the community of humankind. They are responsible for ensuring justice, and as a result, of this responsibility, they also find themselves often experiencing greater hardships. They expect to have to experience these greater hardships as a part of this special covenant. There are 3 major branches of Judaism. In reality, there is a more detailed breakdown even within these 3 major branches, but for our nutshell type of examination, we're going to just keep to these 3 major branches. First of all, we have the Orthodox branch of Judaism. In the Orthodox branch of Judaism, you find that the daily rituals, the manners of dress, even the dietary restrictions are based very strictly on the laws of the Torah and are strictly adhered to. When we talk about dietary restrictions, they keep what they call kosher. They don't eat pork. They don't eat meat unless it has been slaughtered in a religiously acceptable way, etc. And you will often be able to, often though not always, be able to recognize someone who is an Orthodox Jew by the way that they are dressed. Although some Orthodox Jews do not dress any differently than the rest of the community. Services in the Orthodox branch are still conducted in Hebrew, so they are considered to be very traditional. Now, the next major branch we're going to talk about is the Reform branch. This was an attempt to modernize the religion in order to allow the members of the Jewish society to better assimilate into their local cultures and their local societies without losing the Jewish identity. They still wanted to be Jewish. They still wanted to identify with the Jewish faith and follow the Jewish faith, but they didn't want to stand out quite so much or be quite so different from the people around them. This is a very good example of how globalization actually has an effect on reforming a religion. The need for better intercultural communication, the need for that assimilation actually catalyzed a change in this religion, or at least in this branch of the religion. The conservative branch is a middle ground between the Orthodox branch and the Reformists. They felt essentially that the Reformists went too far. They liked the idea of the Reformists in that they did not want to adhere to the traditions as strictly as the Orthodox Jews did, but they felt the Reformists went too far and lost too much of their Jewish identity by going away from the traditions as much as they did. So they just formed another branch that is essentially the same basic ideas as the Orthodox and the Reforms, but just a middle ground when it comes to the adherence to tradition. Okay, so let's look at some of the beliefs and practices of Judaism and their cultural impact. First of all, it is a historical fact, whether you want to look at this from a religious perspective or not. It is a historical fact that for many millennia, the Jewish people have repeatedly found themselves to be the objects of global social persecution by one group of people or another. They've often gotten the short end of the stick. And because of their long history of mistreatment at the hands of a variety of different outside cultures, they tend to internalize into their communities quite a bit. And some Jews find it difficult then to trust non-Jewish people. Of course, the reality of this varies quite a bit depending upon which cultural group you're looking at. If you are in a cultural group that is more rural or maybe more collective, you're going to find that this cultural impact is a great deal stronger than you would see in Jewish people here in the United States who are part of an individualistic culture and are more assimilated and find themselves in an environment of greater religious tolerance and greater religious diversity. So here in the United States, you may not find that to be as much the truth as you would, say, in another country like Poland. Learning is also a very important principle of the Jewish faith and is very highly valued in the Jewish faith. Many Jewish people are encouraged not only to do well in their outside non-religious studies, but to study within their religion as well and go to go to schools in order to learn their religion. Because of this emphasis on education, it is very common for Jewish people to seek professions that center on the need for education, such as teaching, of course, education itself, law, medicine, literature. If you have been in Pittsburgh for very long and you've been around the legal community, you know that many of the attorneys here in Pittsburgh are Jewish. So when I went to law school, whenever there was a Jewish holiday, it was like a ghost town there. So, I mean, we would almost always have our classes canceled on Jewish holidays because generally the professors wouldn't be there. So we see a lot of Jewish people in these kinds of professions. Justice is also a very important value of Judaism. This is kind of falls into the concept of being the chosen people, or that special covenant with God that we talked about earlier. A Jewish individual is said to be responsible for ensuring the moral treatment of others. Because of this concept, Jewish people are credited for establishing the whole notion of justice as an important element of social order. And they played a very active role during the civil rights movements of the 1960s, even though they were not directly one of the groups that were involved in that particular those particular movements. Jewish people dealt with a lot of the hardship that they dealt with over the centuries by looking inward toward their families and communities for their strength. So they are a very collective culture. Jewish families, including their extended families, tend to be very close to each other. They rely very heavily on each other. And this is not just a family thing, but a community thing. Their individual communities tend to be very strong and very close. They also share a sense of community with Jews throughout the world. So if a Jewish community in another country is experiencing some kind of persecution or hardship, that is going to be deeply felt by people in other countries, Jewish people in other countries, even if they have no other connection with the people who are experiencing the hardships. There are also 4 major life events in a Jewish person's life that are emphasized and commemorated with some type of religious ritual. That is birth, adulthood, marriage, and death. Because each person has 4 major life events that are marked with activities by the family and by the community, it gives the community and the family a lot of opportunity to be able to get together and solidify the community, their membership in the community, reminding that individual particularly who they are, who they identify with, who their community is, and the fact that they are one of us, and they should identify themselves as Jewish, as being Jewish, and that should be important to them. There is no distinct mention of an afterlife in the Torah. Therefore, Judaism actually contains a wide range of beliefs on that issue. Some Jewish people believe that there is an afterlife. Some people don't believe there is an afterlife. Some people don't have any opinion on it whatsoever. In fact, I had a student who was an Orthodox Jew not that terribly long ago, a few semesters ago, who, when we discussed this, was actually very surprised. He had believed in an afterlife, had been taught about an afterlife, did not realize that there wasn't any actual mention in the Torah. So he talked to his father, who was a religious scholar, and found out that that was actually true. And he put together a paper with his findings, which I will make available to you on Blackboard. So because of the lack of literature about an afterlife, many Jews tend to adopt their own personal beliefs on whether or not there's an afterlife, but really they don't tend to dwell about it much. They don't talk about the concept of the afterlife very much. They really take much more of a very realistic view of death as being just part of the natural process of life. It's not something that they put too much focus on. from a religious perspective. Okay, now we're going to talk about Hinduism. Hinduism is the world's oldest known religion still in common practice today. Now, that does not mean that Hinduism is the world's oldest known religion, not by a long shot, but it is just the oldest known religion that is still in common practice today. There is no single founder or creed or teacher or prophet that is acknowledged by all Hindus as being central to the religion. And there is no single holy book or spiritual text that one can point to as being of primary importance to the religion. Instead, there are several sacred texts. The first of the sacred texts of Hinduism and the oldest are the Vedas. These are 4 collections of ritual materials, hymns, texts, and speculations that were composed in antiquity, very much in antiquity, around 1400 BC. These are extremely old, so you can understand that. So you see, when you look at this date, that Hinduism greatly exceeds the age of Judaism and Christianity. The next of the sacred texts that we'll talk about is the Upanishads. These texts are a little bit younger, but still very old, written between 800 and 400 BC, and they teach the knowledge of the gods, and record the spiritual experiences of the ancients. Hinduism is a polytheistic religion, and so the Upanishads teach the knowledge of the many gods of Hinduism. And from the perspective of enlightened individuals, ancient enlightened individuals, they record their spiritual experiences and their knowledge of the things that happen to these gods. The Bhagavad Gita is an 18-chapter poem that was written around 540 to 300 BC. The poem is a dialogue between a warrior, just any particular warrior of the time, and the god Lord Krishna, who was the god of war, or who is the god of war. Krishna outlines 3 paths to liberation of the soul. He talks about knowledge, action, and devotion. So the Bhagavad Gita is an attempt to hear from the god Krishna how to liberate one's soul. Okay, so now let's look at some of the core assumptions of Hinduism. First of all, Hindus believe that the divine resides in everything and everyone, including animals. Each soul is divine, and it is the purpose of life to become aware of that existence of the divinity within each individual. When you greet somebody who is a Hindu, you say the term namaste while putting your hands together and bowing. This basically means I bow to the divinity within you, or acknowledge the divinity within you. Hindus also believe that the world around us is not the true reality. In order to understand the true reality, or to connect with the true reality, one needs to be able to transcend the materialism of the world around us in order to see the actual and the ultimate reality. If you are able to unite your inner self to the ultimate reality, you will achieve nirvana, which is true happiness or liberation of the soul. The ultimate reality that they're referring to, or the absolute or ultimate reality they're referring to, is called Brahman. This is a special knowledge about the truth of things. It is a philosophical absolute, therefore it cannot be disputed. Once you know it, you just know it's the truth. There's nothing else that can dispute it, nothing else that can go against it. Because one must discover the divinity within them in order to experience Brahman, intellect is considered to be subordinate to intuition, since intuition is a reflection of the divinity within you. The truth is already within you. You only have to become aware of it. The world around you is an illusion because nothing around you is permanent. everything is constantly changing. Hindus believe in reincarnation. They believe in a cycle of birth, death, and reincarnation. You go through this cycle over and over and over again until you realize Brahman, until you discover the divinity within you and experience the ultimate truth of Brahman, and therefore then can experience nirvana, or true happiness, liberation of the soul. You do this by leading a good life. You create good karma in each life and raise your spiritual status in each life, so that in the next life, when you are born into the next existence, you're closer to your goal, your ultimate goal of nirvana. So you can ultimately break the cycle of birth, death, and reincarnation by reaching your ultimate goal of achieving or experiencing Brahman and achieving nirvana. Now, in Hinduism, there is no one prescribed path toward enlightenment. There's no one way to do it. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna gives some ideas on how to do that. In the other sacred texts, people who have achieved experienced Brahman within their lifetime give their suggestions on how they did it and what their experiences were. Many people in Hinduism find a living guru or somebody, a teacher that they can follow, that they can say how they did it. But there's no one prescribed path or no one way to do it. It really is up to the individual to decide how they wish to worship and improve their spiritual status. Hinduism is a very ritual-heavy religion. We see that people who follow the Hindu religion engage in a large assortment of rites. Many of these are festivals and community behaviors, but the majority of these rituals occur on an individual basis within the home and within the family and amid their daily lives. So they are constantly reaffirming their beliefs and constantly reaffirming their spiritual goals. So Hinduism is considered to be a complete way of life because it affects so much of what they do on a daily basis. The concept of Dharma is very important to Hinduism. It guides a Hindu's daily interactions and behaviors. Now, I did not understand the concept of Dharma very well, so I actually took it upon myself to try and ask a Hindu about it. In fact, I embarrassed my children quite a bit by doing what I did, but I have a lot of Indian people who live in my apartment complex. So I stepped out on my balcony one day and yelled at a couple of guys saying, "Hey, by any chance are either one of you Hindu?" And after they looked at me like I was nuts, because they couldn't figure out why this crazy white woman was shouting at them, asking them why they were Hindu, I said, "Yeah, can you explain to me Dharma?" And they're like, "What? Why is she talking about Dharma?" But once I told them, look, I teach intercultural communication. I'm really interested in what Dharma is. I don't really understand it. Can you explain it to me? They were very excited to try and explain Dharma to me to the best of their ability and talk to me about this. I think you'll notice if you're interested in other types of religions, everybody loves to talk about their values and beliefs and their religions. If you just show an interest, then you're not going to have a problem getting them to talk about their ideas, you're going to have a problem to get them to stop talking about their ideas. So, what they told me about Dharma was very interesting. Basically, the only way that they could explain Dharma was to give me several examples of stories that they learned. They told me a story about how one god was supposed to inherit something but was not able to inherit that, where that inheritance was taken away from him by another person, and then later on that God forgave that person. But I mean, it's a more complicated story than that. But the point is, they learn the behaviors that are good and valuable and acceptable behaviors, like forgiveness and charity and patience, through these kinds of stories. And I asked them, where do you learn Dharma? Is it written down somewhere? Is there like a book of Dharma or something? They said, no, it's not a written thing particularly, that it's just they learn it from everywhere. That was literally what they said. They said, we learn it from everywhere. We learn it from our families. We learn it from our schools. We learn it from our government. Dharma is everywhere, and we learn it from everywhere. In fact, the importance of Dharma is so strong in a Hindu's life that to go against these concepts of Dharma, these things that are these values and these beliefs, can actually create what they consider to be bad karma. Bad karma goes against your goals of trying to reach nirvana, and can affect you in the next life, bring you down a step on your spiritual path. In Hinduism, there are 4 stages of life, and it is not typical to get past stage 2. But each individual must pass through all 4 stages of life in order to gain the necessary knowledge to unite with the ultimate truth, or Brahman. So the first is pretty typical. It's the student. This person studies the Vedas and serves an apprenticeship with the teacher. This is like a Sunday school kind of stage. Everybody learns the basics of their religion. 2 is the householder. The person grows up, gets married, and tries to live a very highly spiritual and ethical life. Again, nothing out of the ordinary, pretty typical. Now, stage 3 is not so ordinary. This is the forest dweller. This person separates from their home and engages in intensive study and meditation in order to try and experience Brahman and get closer to nirvana. The ascetic is the person who has united with Brahman, who has achieved that. They completely separate themselves from all people and possessions, and are, even though they may have dealings with other people, they talk to people, but their interactions with the material world are very minimal, because they have united with Brahman. They are above that. When we talk about Hindu concepts of death, remember we said that Hindus believe in reincarnation. Therefore, they believe in the immortality of the soul. The soul never dies, but is reincarnated into a new body or a new existence. If a person is able to experience their divine self within a particular lifetime, if they are able to experience the ultimate truth of Brahman, this cycle will be broken, and they will then achieve nirvana, or true liberation or happiness of the soul. Therefore, bodies are cremated as quickly as possible after death in Hindu cultures. The ashes are then scattered, and usually, when possible, into a holy river. In India, this would most likely be the Ganges, if the Ganges is close enough to do this. So, travel tip, people: do not swim in the Ganges unless you've had lots and lots of shots. It's not clean, it's not safe. Even though you will see the locals doing it, I don't suggest you join in unless you have has had a lot of inoculations. Okay, now we're going to talk about Buddhism. On this slide, you will see the traditional explanation of how Buddhism began. As you can see, it was founded by a man named Siddhartha Gautama. In this traditional description, they say that Siddhartha Gautama was an Indian prince who became disenchanted with his lavish lifestyle. After seeing the suffering that was going on around him, he left on a 6-year journey of meditation, emerging from that with a new philosophy on how to end suffering and attain peace. And he spent the rest of his years spreading his teachings and was referred to as the Buddha, or the Enlightened One. Buddha does mean enlightened one. This is not exactly, though, how it went down. I have had the privilege of being able to read a very spiritual biography on Siddhartha Gautama, and the actual story was that Siddhartha Gautama was very wealthy, the son of a very wealthy Brahmin, who Brahmin is like a member of a priest class in Hinduism. So Siddhartha Gautama was actually a Hindu. He felt that his surroundings, his lavish surroundings, his peaceful surroundings were not conducive to his spiritual journey. So he became a forest dweller and gave up all the lavish lifestyle that he had known, and did spend a lot of time studying and meditating and trying to get closer to the ultimate truth. He went several years down that path, and then heard the teachings of another Buddha. He is not, Siddhartha Gautama is the Buddha that started what we know as Buddhism today, but he is not the only enlightened individual. He is not the only person who is called Buddha. Anyway, so he was listening to the teachings of another Buddha, and he felt that he had achieved an epiphany and a new understanding of things. And that understanding, and he decided to leave the forest dwelling lifestyle, and after a series of happenings, he ended up becoming involved as a merchant in a village, and lived for several years as the average person, a very wealthy. He was very bright and became a very wealthy merchant, until one day he realized that his life was not something that he was proud of, that was not something that he felt that was conducive to his spiritual journey. So he left that lifestyle as well, and met a ferryman, a man whose job it was to take people from one side of the river to the next. Became friends with this person, lived with this person until that person's death. Learned from the river. He learned many teachings from the river, and in that time period he was able to learn the teachings and make the final step of his journey to achieve this understanding of an ultimate reality and a new philosophy that was different from the Hindu philosophies that he had learned as a child. He, instead of thinking about gods, multiple gods and their ways of doing things and their lessons, he learned from nature. He learned from everything around him. He felt that the ultimate reality did not come from these teachings of gods, but from something else. So he came up with this concept of suffering, how to end suffering, how to attain this ultimate peace, and then he did spend the rest of his years as a ferryman teaching spreading his teachings, and was known as a very enlightened individual, or as a Buddha. Okay, looking at some of the core assumptions of Buddhism. First of all, there are multiple forms or denominations of Buddhism, some of which vary quite distinctly in their ritualistic behaviors. They share the same ideologies, but the way they go about ritualizing these ideologies are different. The way they go about their worship is different. But some of the forms or denominations of Buddhism that you will see are Theravada, Mahayana, Zen, Pure Land, Vajrayana, or Tibetan. They all, as I said, share the same basic core principles. First of all, they believe that Buddha was not a god. So Buddha is not looked at as a deity of any sort. He was just a man who had experienced a very important social or spiritual awakening. They also believe that individuals have the potential to seek truth and liberate themselves from suffering, from the suffering of the material world, through their self-reflection and transformation. The driving purpose of Buddhism is not, like many other religions, to provide answers to cosmic questions or to talk about what happens after death or any type of afterlife or something. Instead, it is meant really just as a way to cope with and understand the present existence of its followers. It is meant as a way to try to alleviate the suffering of the average human individual. In Buddhism, there are the Four Noble Truths. These are the axioms from which all the rest of Buddha's teachings derive. So if you're to understand any of the teachings of Buddhism, you must understand these basic Four Noble Truths. First of all, the first one is dukkha. Life is suffering. Since all worldly conditions are impermanent, the experience of these worldly conditions are subject to change and loss. Therefore, even the experiences that are positive and good experiences, they cannot provide any type of lasting happiness, and therefore even good things to carry some degree of suffering. So all of life is suffering. The second is tanha. Suffering is caused by our own feelings of desire, envy, and greed, and by our lack of realization of our own impermanence. So because we do not understand about the fact that things are impermanent, we expect ourselves and those things around us to be, or to have at least a degree of permanence. And because we envy things, we want more things, we want things to be better, we want certain things, situations to happen. These desires, these envies, these greeds, and this lack of understanding of our own impermanence are what cause us to feel suffering. So far, it's pretty much downer, but if you look now to the third noble truth, or the end of suffering, by overcoming the things which cause suffering, tanha, an individual can put an end to their suffering. So it doesn't have to be that way. The remedy is the fourth noble truth. The freedom from the causes of suffering can be achieved by following the principles of the Eightfold Path. So unlike Hinduism, Buddhism actually tells you exactly how to go about achieving the ultimate goal. In this case, the alleviation of suffering and the understanding of truth. Now let's look at the steps of the Eightfold Path. The steps of the Eightfold Path are not to be attempted in order. They are attempted simultaneously. First of all, you must have the right view. This is obtaining an awareness or acceptance or understanding of the Four Noble Truths. So in order to move along the Eightfold Path, you must first believe the Four Noble Truths as truth. The second of the Eightfold, or the second step of the Eightfold Path is right purpose. The adherent must free themselves of any negative or hurtful thoughts and emotions, because negative thoughts and emotions hinder the development of a clear and peaceful mind. You must also always try to use the right speech. The adherent should only use meaningful speech and only speak when what they have to say is in the furtherance of promoting truth and peace and harmony, and avoid any kind of speech that might cause any misunderstanding or harm or division within society. So it is very important that you only say things when they are for the right purpose. You must also have the right action. What that means is to exercise self-control and avoid harmful behaviors and be mindful of the rights of others. So anything that you do in life, you must be constantly in control of yourself. You should never be out of control. You should always think about other people's, the effect that your behaviors are going to have on others, and whether or not your behaviors are going to infringe on the rights of other people before you do those behaviors. Right livelihood. This is refraining from occupations that harm living beings. If you are part of an occupation that causes harm to other living beings, then that is not conducive to your spiritual progress. You must also make the right efforts to overcome and avoid any types of negative states of mind, and also make the efforts to try to develop and nurture positive states of mind. You need to have the right mindfulness, looking at things in the present and seeing them for what they truly are, rather than through the lens of an emotional or intellectual bias. Trying to see things as they are in a very raw and truthful existence, in a very matter-of-fact way. And right concentration. Make sure you need to try to free the mind with meditation. If you free your mind with meditation, spend a lot of time meditating, then this will reveal the true nature of things. Okay, so now let's look at some of the cultural manifestations of Buddhism. Buddhists believe that language is insufficient to communicate truth and therefore can be misleading. The concept of right speech along the Eightfold Path. Therefore, in cultures that are influenced by Buddhism, we see that there is a much greater impact or a much greater emphasis put on nonverbal communications than there generally is in other cultures. People from these cultures take a lot more meaning from their environments, so including their nonverbal communications. They tend also not to speak unless they feel that what they have to say is important. So they don't always talk as much as people in other cultures. They will wait until either they are certain about what they have to say and confident about what they have to say, or they'll wait until they're asked to say something, asked to contribute to a conversation. Buddhists also believe that everything in life, as well as life itself, is impermanent. Because of that influence, people in Buddhist-influenced cultures tend to take a very practical, right-now approach to problem solving. Japan, a Buddhist-influenced culture, exhibited this type of behavior when we saw the disasters several years ago, the tsunamis and the nuclear disasters. They were able to recover from that in a way that most cultures would not. They responded to the disasters in a very practical way, a very right now way. They were able to respond and recover much more quickly than many cultures would have been able to do so. As in other religions, Buddhism also has an element of an impetus for people to do good, something that encourages people to behave in a way that promotes social harmony. And for Buddhism, this is the idea that the voluntary performance of either good or bad deeds or thoughts will produce either good or bad karma. That karma will follow you through your lifetimes until you reach nirvana. The more good karma you create and accumulate, the closer you will get to nirvana. The more bad karma you create and accumulate, the longer it will take for you to reach nirvana. In reference to death, Buddhism, like Hinduism, believes in reincarnation. There is a little bit of a difference between Buddhism and Hinduism in this respect. In Buddhism, there is no mention of a particular soul that exists beyond the physical death, a soul that is reborn from one existence to the next. But instead, it talks about the karma of a person accumulating from one existence to the next. So a karma, instead of just a soul, one perpetual soul, goes from each existence into the next. Again, when we talked about Buddhism, we say that Buddhism is mostly concerned with the alleviation of suffering for the people who are living and practicing it. So the concept of dying in Buddhism is related to that as well. Buddhists believe that dying is a natural and unavoidable feature of existence, that it's something that you cannot avoid, it's something that is natural to life. And the only way that dying can cause suffering for you and for the people around you is if you attempt to avoid it, either physically or mentally. If you are afraid of it, if you are upset by it, if you are sad by it, this can cause you suffering. Otherwise, it cannot cause you suffering. There are many similarities between Hinduism and Buddhism. You cannot have failed to see that we often, when we talked about these two religions, we often use the same types of terminologies. We talked about an ultimate truth, or Brahman. We talked about reincarnation. So we talk about nirvana, and we talk about karma. And these are similar, these are both a part of Hinduism and Buddhism. So let's take a look at some of the similarities and some of the differences between these two religions. First of all, we'll look at the similarities. In both Hinduism and Buddhism, there is the belief that the true reality is other than the reality in which we live, or Brahman. There's also a belief that ultimate happiness and true reality can be found through introspection, so that Brahman and Nirvana can be found through meditation. They believe in the concepts of rebirth and karma leading to the ultimate level of nirvana. So they both believe in the idea of reincarnation until nirvana is achieved. However, Buddhism promotes no deities, while Hinduism is a polytheistic religion. Buddhism also seeks mainly or only to alleviate the suffering of the current human state, while Hinduism, on the other hand, will offer stories and theories about creation, the origins of the universe, the origins of the humans, and other more cosmic speculations. Buddhism does not bother with that sort of thing. Buddhism also offers a very precise method for seeking nirvana, the Eightfold Path. Hinduism gives general guides and examples as to how other people have gone about their way of doing it, but leaves it up to the individual to choose their own particular methods. Why do you suppose Hinduism and Buddhism are so very similar? Well, Buddhism originated in India at a time when Hinduism was the dominant religion. In fact, Siddhartha Gautama himself, the founder of Buddhism, was a Hindu. In fact, he was a member of the Hindu priest class. So Hinduism was something that was very dear to him, was very important to him. It was through his meditations and through his introspections that he found new philosophies, but these philosophies were building upon his already Hindu philosophies. Some things from Hinduism he accepted and some things he did not accept, but this was essentially an extension of his Hindu philosophies. A very interesting point from a cultural study point of view. Both Hinduism and Buddhism emphasize the responsibility and importance of the individual in his or her own existence. Especially Hinduism, in that Hinduism allows the individual the ability to choose their own path toward liberation. So it really is up to the individual to take responsibility and take the driver's seat, if you will, toward their own their own salvation, toward their own pathway toward finding the divine within them. Now, this would sound like a very individualistic type of mindset, and yet both of these religions find themselves to be most popular in very collective cultures. In fact, some of the most collective cultures in the world. This, if you look at it from the surface, doesn't seem to make sense. Why do you think that this may be so? Personally, I believe that even though these religions focus much on the individual, as far as the individual's choices and the individual's responsibilities, they are actually very collectively oriented in their teachings. Most of the teachings of both Hinduism and Buddhism, if you look through the Eightfold Path, a lot of what is included in the Eightfold Path for Buddhism and in Dharma and the Dharma of Hinduism refers to relationships, how you relate to other people. They're always talking about putting yourself above, or putting your groups above yourself, thinking about how your speech is going to affect somebody else, thinking about how your behaviors are going to affect somebody else, how your mindsets, your thoughts, your attitudes are affecting the overall group, and to refrain from behaviors and thoughts and speech that are going to cause division, that are going to cause problems for other people and problems for the group. So even though on the surface these seem like religions that are very attractive to an individualistic mindset, they are actually at their core, their teachings are very important to that collective mindset that exists within these cultures. Now let's spend a few minutes talking about Confucianism. Confucianism is a very big influencer of culture in East Asia particularly. And Confucianism had its origins in modern-day China around 551 BC with a man named Confucius, somebody I'm sure we have all heard the name of. Confucius was disenchanted with the ineffective political system and the constant warfare that was going on around him in his time period. He felt that he felt that he had ideas that could make this system better. He felt that if he had a very structured society based upon his philosophies of human nature, he could control, or at least human beings could control, how they interact with each other, how they behave with one another. He looked at society as a machine, as at least the potential to be a well-oiled machine, through structure, through knowledge of the right ways to do things and the right times to do things, and everybody being on the same page and sticking to these very rigid philosophies, then society would work more smoothly and be much more harmonious. Confucianism is not a religion in the theological sense or in the conventional sense. It is actually a political and social philosophy. Confucius believed that people are inherently good, meaning that they are born with good intentions and with the desire to be kind to one another, but that they must learn correct behavior through education and self-reflection and through established cultural norms. Without this structure, they don't know how to be good, even though they, by nature, wish to be good. He felt that every individual had responsibilities according to their status and their role in society, their relationships to other people, and that each person must carry out the responsibilities of their status, of their role, of their relationships in order to maintain social order. If everyone had a place and everyone had a role and everyone fulfilled the duties of that role to the best of their ability, then the society would work as like I said, a well-oiled machine without any problems. He felt that people should be deeply committed to the concept of social harmony, to the betterment of the overall society, that was more important than individual gain. If each person played out their role and was able to contribute to society in the best way possible, then that would be overall better for each individual, for each people, or for each person, as you know, as well as the overall group, than putting each individual's thoughts and feelings and desires ahead of that of the group. So it is this is a mindset that is collective in almost in its definition. So cultures that were heavily influenced by Confucianism are, again, some of the most collective cultures in the world. Confucius also put highly valued considerations for the feelings of others. Again, this is something that adds to the idea of collectivism. If you are in a very collective society, you put social harmony over the betterment of the individual. So consideration for the feelings of other people are more important than the consideration of your own feelings. Confucius did not provide some kind of sacred text or writing of his ideas, or at least none exists that anyone knows of today. However, his followers compiled over 50 years a collection of about 20 books containing his sayings, his proverbs, his stories, his teachings, in order to pass down Confucius's philosophies. And these are called the Analects. These are the closest thing to a sacred text that there is for Confucianism. The cultural teachings of Confucianism include, first, Gen, or humanism. This is the idea that all humans are inherently good. Because they're inherently good, their relationship should reflect that goodness. And therefore, people should be harmonious and considerate to everyone around them. The second cultural concept is Li. These are rituals, proprieties, conventions. Remember, we said that Confucianism feels that in order to help people along with their inherent goodness, they must have a concept of the right way, the right things to do, and the right way to do them all at the right time. This is the idea of Li. Harmony and order are best maintained when people are able to express themselves in the right way at the right time, and everybody is on the same page and doing it the right way and the right time at the same time. Te. This is the concept of power. Political power should be employed for the betterment of everyone, and leaders should have a good character, and that should their character should command respect. Therefore, and their attitudes and their behaviors should be devoted to the common good. So your political power, people do have to be in political power and have essentially a higher status than maybe other people who have different roles. But the people who are in those roles should use that role wisely, should use that role for the betterment of society. That if somebody is in a position or a role where they have power over other people, and they use that in a way that is beneficial to themselves as individuals rather than beneficial to the entire group, then they are misusing power. Confucius also put a great deal of emphasis on the arts, or Wen. He felt that the arts were a means of peace and an instrument of education. He looked to the arts as one of the best ways to pass down his philosophies and his ideologies from one generation to the next. The ideologies of Confucianism greatly influenced the way people in Confucianist-influenced societies such as China, Korea, and Japan communicate with one another and with others as well. The practice of Gen is the definition of empathy, the endeavor to measure the feelings of others by one's own feelings. Therefore, followers of Confucianism, or people within these societies, are more likely to use indirect language and methods of communication when trying to deliver any type of negative information or bad news, if you will. They will make a great effort to try to spare themselves and the person that they are speaking to any type of embarrassment or any type of outright rejection. They will try to minimize any types of disagreement. So, for example, if they want to say no, often instead of saying outright no, they will say maybe, or just somehow try to soften the blow, if you will, or not make somebody look bad or feel bad by telling them that either they or their products are not what is being looked for, that they are less than what they ought to be. They will do everything they can to try and make you feel better about yourself or make you not have to feel embarrassed. They also put a great deal, or Confucianism puts a great deal of emphasis on hierarchical status and role relationships. Remember, we were saying that Confucius felt that everybody has a place and that their responsibility is to fulfill that role or fulfill that place to the best of their ability in order to maintain social order. Therefore, people in Confucianist-oriented societies are likely to put a great deal of emphasis on hierarchy, on role relationships. They will usually address and interact differently with people based upon their societal roles or their positions within a community or organization. And they have very defined ways of doing these things. How you act with one person versus how you act with another person versus how you act in different situations. They may be greatly offended if someone neglects to show greater respect and deference to one person who is in a higher position than they would to somebody who is in a lower position. Egalitarianism, or at least the appearance of egalitarianism, is not something that they particularly respect. Again, Confucius believed that proper ritual and protocol shape and define human character. And it is necessary to have a right way to do things and a right time to do things in order to maintain social patterns and to show respect to each other's role relationships. Therefore, in Confucius-influenced societies today, in their business, their political, their social practices will all involve certain necessary rituals that must be observed if the people within these societies are going to feel like things are being done correctly or things are going well. So when you are interacting with somebody from one of these societies, you have to be aware of the social protocols that they will go through, their rituals that they will go through. And the more that you are able to be a part of those rituals, even to show them that you know those rituals, that you respect those rituals, the better your interactions are going to be. Remember that we said that Confucianism is not a conventional religion. It is more a social philosophy. So Confucius was not concerned with the ideas of an afterlife or the question of death and what happens to you after death from a spiritual perspective, and he really didn't address it at all. His philosophies focused more on the betterment of society, of the current society, rather than upon what happens to an individual after death. His only concepts or philosophies toward death was that a person can die with dignity if they have lived their life according to his social philosophies. If they had fulfilled their responsibilities toward their families and toward the society during their lifetime, then they could die knowing that they had fulfilled their place. As part of Chapter 5, we will also discuss the religion of Islam. We are going to spend a little extra time on Islam than we did on the other religions because it is so much at the forefront of our current events today. Because there is so much misunderstanding about Islam out there, misunderstanding and lack of understanding about Islam. So we're going to reserve Islam right now and talk about it in detail in another PowerPoint. Please take time to look at the assignment of creating a multiple choice exam question based on what you thought was valuable here in Chapter 5. Make sure to upload your question to Blackboard via Turnitin or to hand it to me in class.